a lot of men, have fewer than 2 friends that they would ever share a serious conversation.
What's shaking? Welcome back to All In. I'm your host, Rick Jordan, and back again. I'm excited for this. As TEDx speaker, award-winning thought leader and author, distinguished Toastmaster and keynote speaker, former partner and CEO of a multi-million-dollar retail company, Dai Manuel. Hey.
What's up, Rick?
Dude, I'm happy to be
back. And I was thinking, it's good to be back. It's not like an annoying rash or something. I was invited back. So I mean, I recognize I didn't force my way in, and I like to let people know that because I loved my conversation. I've talked about you guys a ton.
Just so man, thank you,
Ryan, yourself, your whole team. When you guys invited me back, I was like, oh my gosh, I am so honored. And it was just. Listen, you made my day, and I'm just excited to be back here.
Well, thanks, brother. Thank you. We had such a good conversation, and we didn't even get into half of what this is. Why it was good. We didn't even get into half of what it should be. And I remember at the end, after we cut, I was like, we didn't even talk about relationships. And that's like your gig,
Yeah,
it was just enough. Such a good convo. Yeah. And just about, entrepreneurship and self-love, self-care. But now we need to talk about today, man. We need to talk about relationships because there's a lot that have struggled over this past year. I know, we were talking a little bit before the show, and it's, like we've even lost the sense of just touch with people outside of our homes, but also even just that physical touch with people outside of our homes too. And then maybe even sometimes inside our homes, we've lost that touch too, bro. And I want to hear your take on this because we talked about the vulnerability of men last time too.
Yeah.
What it means to be vulnerable. And I love that it can start there because where we left off, I think is really kind of hammering home what that really means. From what I remember of the previous episode, for everyone listening, we do have that link in the show notes to the previous episode. I would highly, highly suggest that you listen to that one. Start as a foundation for this. So vulnerability in men, right? Because I feel that I'm a pretty, unarrogantly, I'm a pretty vulnerable guy. I'm emotionally connected, and I enjoy expressing how I feel, and even though I hold back times, just straight up times that I want to cry, there are definitive times where I just let it out, man, because I just need to feel what I'm feeling, and then bringing other people into that too, to say, hey, this is where I'm at. And I just want to bring that out right now because I'm feeling vulnerable. Can you support me in this moment? And it's probably, for me, at least I think, one of the most masculine things to be able to do that, to kind of be soft and hold that space and just express yourself as a man, and then have that partner in your life be able to be there and support you through that too. So how have you, that's one way I've done it. How have you embraced vulnerability?
Well, I think the biggest thing was I didn't.
Wow. Man.
And what I mean by that is I look at, I want, before I dive into what I mean by that is, I appreciate you sharing how open you are to the idea of just being able to share what's real for you.
Yeah.
Because that's really, vulnerability, when you really boil it down to it, that's often what's happening. We're sharing what's real and alive for us in that moment, And it's a lot of times when we think about vulnerability, we think weakness. And I say we, and I should get away from the generalization. Sorry. I know for myself, when I used to hear the term vulnerability, I automatically went to, oh, weak. You don't do that. Like that's what's up, and I look at who my role models were, specifically like who was I role modeling in my life, and right down to my first real true man-to-man relationship was, son and father. And my dad was amazing man, very caring in his own way. But he grew up with a family, didn't emote, my dad, I remember him even sharing with me, he's like, I can remember he could count on one hand how many times his mom told him that she loved him. Right.
Yeah.
It's I mean, he grew up, he was born in the 40s and grew up in the 50s and 60s and was very straight. That's a very straight, laced kind of guy, like suit and tie kind of guy. And just an amazing dude. But growing up with him, that vulnerability was never a role model. The vulnerability of being able to share what's real for you without the fear of having something used against you, or without the fear of feeling like, oh, I'm being judged or I'm lesser because of this. Do you know what I mean? Like it just, that wasn't role modeled. So I didn't know any better. So I wasn't vulnerable, and if I asked you, and I'll go into a bit more on that, but like, how did you come to this place? Cause I'm just super curious. Like, what you shared with me, it's not the norm. I think it's becoming more the norm, or there's people like you and I, and a lot of other people out there, men specifically, they're like, this should be the norm. There's nothing wrong with it. It actually feels better. My mental health's better for this, but it's not the norm. And like, where did you get your sense or connection with vulnerability?
Yeah, if we talk about fathers, I did have a very good example in vulnerability of men with my dad. He was extremely emotionally connected. Same thing. I mean, it's the same thing with my kids now as he did with me. I always tell them that I love them.
Wow.
So now even my 13-year-old son, who's going to be 14 this year, teenager, hardcore, which is typically the time when they're like, hey, I hate my parents, right?
Right.
But I mean, I get texts when I'm traveling from him, not just my daughter, who's his twin, but from him, it's like, good night, Dad. Hope you had a good day. I love you. And that's, and the reason why he gives that back to me or even initiates that is because I have his entire life. And my dad, even with passing away when I was young at 16, that's the one definitive memory that I've ever had, is that I knew that he loved me because he would always express it, and he would never be afraid to hold emotions back. He never really talked about it being a sign of strength or anything else, but it just was him. And I'm grateful that I've taken after him in that way, but it wasn't, would you feel, this is, I guess, a question because you're the expert in this. I'm not, but.
Well, I'm just trying to figure it out just like everybody else.
Thanks. Appreciate the humility. But yeah, I feel like hearing your story too, is that men a lot, and this translates into the relationships that we have being a man too, with a woman or even with other men. And I think it's conditioning because we see, what's on movies, we see Hollywood, we see, like how people grew up, from those 1940s and 50s couples that you were talking about, to where that was just the thing. The men retire to the study after dinner and leave the women, and who knows what goes on in there besides brandy and cigars. And that's it. And it's really just just a room. And this is how typically what you see, because now it's not that study or whatever it is, but there's still an opportunity for men to gather just to talk about how awesome they are and how much they can pound their chest and what accomplishments they got done that week, and it's always like a one-upping thing rather than actually just sticking around and expressing emotions, So it's more the aggression in that male side rather than the very soft and connected masculine side, because softness can lift other people up just as much as being hardcore can. And I think they're both needed because that's they're both very masculine, but there's a connection, and it depends on the different situations, of course, but there's times I've had to be stern with my kids, but it's never been really yelling. My wife would always tell me that I would sit down, she'd hear me behind a closed door with my kids or something when she just got done being really, really angry with them and, yelling at them. And I would go behind a closed door. And I remember this ever since they were little, man. I would get down on their level. If they were standing when they were 2 years old, I would sit so that I'd be eye to eye with them just be soft with them, very masculine. Like, this is what's going on. Here's where you messed up. This is how I can see where you can fix it going forward and change your behavior. How does that sound to you? And so from behind the closed door, she would say, all I would hear was, and then we'd come out and everything's cool. She's like, what? How does that work? And it's like, well, it's soft yet stern masculinity. It's connected and supportive.
Well, Rick, I got to commend you because, I hear you mentioning masculinity, and I think that's been one of those terms that I think sometimes gets people tripped up. And what I mean by that is like when we often have very clear distinction, or at least belief systems around masculine and feminine. Like what do those terms mean?
Yeah.
But the definitions themselves are rather narrow. And I'm seeing a lot more of this. Like I'm feeling it. I'm sure you've noticed it and you're feeling it just based on how you're talking and what you've done as far as raising kids, but also just raising yourself, but this idea, like you have a more emotionally inclusive understanding of what masculinity means, especially to you, but also to what you understand masculinity to be. And I think that is the conversation I like to see other men. I'm not here to debate it. I'm not here to say your idea or your belief's better than my idea or my belief's better than yours. Like I'm not here to fit anybody into like as they say, the square peg round hole. Like listen, but recognizing that there's clearly room for us to have a healthier understanding of what is masculinity.
Yeah. What
does it mean to be a man? Right. And for me, my belief systems, at least what I always believed, was like being very stoic, right? Don't express your emotions. Keep nice and even and cool. Unless you lose your noodle, well, go ahead, because be rough and tough and, be big and strong. Don't cry. Like you just look at synonyms. I talk about this in my TED Talk, I started looking up the synonyms associated with femininity and masculinity. Masculinity, look up the synonyms. Bravado. Virility, right? Yeah. Machismo. I'm like, dude, I just felt like pounding my chest,
time to go into the study.
Well, but seriously, I didn't see other terms like what you were saying, right? Like the way that you understand masculine to be, and especially how you carry yourself. Like you talked a bit about the softness aspect, even vulnerability. Can that be synonymous, right? Caring, gentle. Like, could those be synonymous with being a man? I say 100% for sure. And I'm thinking you're the same way. And I think a lot of people are starting to recognize that we can't be so square in our definitions, right? Like it just, and especially now with the gender conversation. Right?
Oh yeah, no doubt.
Let's just take out the masculine and the feminine. Let's just talk about being better humans. Well, why not?
For sure, man. And you can have both sides of it. Yeah. And I feel like that's how we were created to be too. Cause the same guy that can hug my kids after they get in trouble just to reassure that they know them. I'm the same guy that can strap a gun onto my waist and guard a celebrity, cause I've done that in private security that I've on. Yeah, man. I'm talking like Caitlyn Jenner. Crazy. Yeah. Rahm Emanuel, the former mayor of Chicago. So you can have the bravado along with the soft at the same time. And even in that industry, it helps too, because you have to relate to everybody else who's around you. So if there's a threat, dude, a soft voice goes much further, especially in those situations, than it does just reaching for your pistol on your side. So you can de-escalate situations a lot faster than just speaking with somebody softly than you can pounding your chest.
That's right. And
there's a time for pounding your chest. There is definitively a time for pounding your chest. All right. Let's just be clear on that, because
I agree. Like there is a place for it, right? Yeah. And so that's why, this whole conversation around vulnerability, like I wasn't vulnerable, but I knew I wanted to be, but I just didn't know how. And I often consider vulnerability to be very much like a skill. Like we learn any skill, we get better at it the more we practice.
Oh yeah, dude. Even with everything I described, dude, I still suck at it here and there, for sure. I still screw up.
Yeah, but where do we have safe places to practice? Like that's, I think, a bit of the conundrum, right? Like we get into a place where I didn't, and I looked at my spheres of influence, my closest friends, especially at the time where I felt most conflicted, meaning that I knew I wanted to be able to share what was going on for me. I was dealing with a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. I'd learned to cope with a lot of that stress and anxiety through alcohol. That was my default. I'd go to having a few drinks because in the moment it made things feel better. So momentarily I felt a bit happier and less mindful of all the stress and the other things in my life. And I could just push it away for a little bit but not talk to anybody, not talk to my wife about it. Like just trying to avoid things, and got very good at numbing.
For sure.
I needed to be vulnerable. I'll tell you, I needed to get some stuff off my chest. I needed to just put it out to the world to find out. And this is the craziest thing about vulnerability. I have these groups called MENtorship Mondays. So MENtorship Mondays. And it's free, but it's guys that are committed to come together every Monday. We meet on Zoom and we just talk it out. We create a space where we can just share openly whatever's real. Sometimes, hey, I just had an amazing week. Here's some great things. I just landed my best client ever. And we want to celebrate that. Like, I don't know about you, Rick, but a lot of times I used to be sheepish just even about talking about some of the successes that I'd achieved. Things that were really, really hard to do. And I felt like even with some of my closest male friends, I couldn't share that because right away, I'm like, they're judging me. They think I'm bragging. Like it just automatically, I turn the positive into a negative and I'm afraid to talk about it. And so when I'm saying vulnerability, it's not just about the bad stuff. It's about the great stuff too, but where do we have time to practice for our space that we feel safe enough to practice this stuff?
It's difficult too, for real. Yeah. Cause even in, if we look at this as far as relationships, or marriage, that escape that you were talking about, even, having the drink, even in my example of the study, right? When the men would retire, what would they do? They were avoiding the times to be vulnerable and they were turning to alcohol to do that, because there's other ways to run away from yourself and those things. And, but vulnerability, man, how do you feel that vulnerability plays a huge part in your marriage?
Well, so 11 years, I won't go into the story, but I haven't had a drink for over 11 years now. And awesome. That was, well, thank you. It was me making a decision though. It was a choice. Like I have a lot of friends that are in recovery and I have a lot of respect for that. And I know they've done various programs to support them through their recovery. And I always had a challenge with that because I never felt like I was addicted. I never felt powerless to the alcohol, to the drugs. I was fully aware of my choices, but I valued in the moment what those little escapes could do for me over what was right in front of me, like family, friends, people actually cared about me, unconditional love, right? And yet I would still value the drink. Having some drugs.
And it's not just even necessarily has to be a substance, right? It could be freaking Xbox or PlayStation. It could be Netflix. Any of those escapes. People get addicted to those too. And it's not, it's more like it's not addicted to those, it's addicted to the escape. Would you agree with that?
Yes. I love how you just said that. So much on point because you're right. It's the act itself. And the fact that it just, because you're focusing on that one thing in that moment, you don't really give yourself the space to even think about any of the other stuff. So it is truly an escape, and in my case, it felt very much like numbing, because I'd wake up the next morning. Now my health feels crappy, but also on top of that, the problems are still there.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah.
I'm not feeling any better about myself. And usually I'm feeling worse.
No doubt. It's even like the escape with porn too, with people that watch that too much, and then all of a sudden, it's like straight up, they can't get it up because they've been escaping the real life for so long.
Yeah. And
I'm making a hand. That's not the right hand gesture to talk about that. I just realized that.
I got what you were saying there.
Escape the real.
I'm like, cut. No. So, but you know what? I just the fact that we're even talking about this is just, I really do wish that when I was in my 20s, I felt comfortable enough to have this kind of a conversation. And I realize as I start to connect with, younger guys in our communities that are coming in, like the craziest thing is, right? Like I started this when I was living in Bali. I just had a crazy idea because I had this, so here I am. I'm in this 11 years of sobriety. Let's just say that I've chosen not to have any drinks because I grew so much. That first year I took away the crutch, right? My crutches were alcohol. It just helped me function. You take away that crutch and it's like, whoa, I don't know how to walk, know? Yeah. And so I had to learn to walk again. And that's where I had to learn how to start being vulnerable because I didn't have any more escape. There was nowhere I could escape to. I was facing my challenges head on and I wanted to chase it. I wanted to chase a better life, to be quite honest. Like I knew that I had all the makings to have a great life, but sure didn't feel like it was working. And I had to just take ownership that it was because I kept making poor choices, poor actions. And so I took away the crutches and now I've got to learn how to walk. And I'm like, I don't know how to do this. My friends, my closest friends right now, they don't know how to help me or support me. Like all the guys that were my really good friends at that time was like, yeah, let's go watch USC and have some beers, you know, and or let's go play a round of golf. And we just rushed through the 18th so we could hang out on the 19th, you know, like that was how we operated. That was my normal. So all of a sudden I take away that. I'm like, what the hell am I going to do? How do I do this? And I was very fortunate that I had a wife that was very supportive, you know, and so she supported me along as best she could, but there was still a lot that she couldn't do. And to be honest, I wasn't expecting her to, you know, it was stuff that I had to do for myself. I found a great psychiatrist. I worked with him for like 4 months. I found a relationships counselor, worked with her for about 3 months. And I just started doing a lot of inner work, stuff on me. That was personal development in nature, not professional development. Because I'll tell you, I was the guy that loved all the professional development stuff.
Yeah.
Anything that stroked my ego, Rick, I was all for it. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
that's an escape too, right?
It is, man. Yeah. It's like, and it was, business was a great escape. And long and short, I'll just get to the point. After a number of years of just growing and learning new ways of dealing with some of the stress and dealing with it in a healthier way, that I'd feel good role modeling those behaviors to my kids, to my families, to my friends. Like that's what it came down to. I was just like, my wife asked me a question. She said, Dai, are you the type of man you'd want your daughters to marry? Dude. When she asked me that question, it was like getting punched in the nose and kicked in between the legs at the same time.
Wow.
You know, I was like, I'm not. If someone like me at that time, 11 years ago, showed up on my doorstep asking to talk to my daughters, asking to see my wife, I'd be like, get the hell out of here. You're not coming in here.
Yeah.
But that's who I was. I was that guy, you know? And so that realization put me in a hard spot because all of a sudden I'm like, okay, well, how do I evolve? How do I grow? How do I become that person? And man, it's not easy. It's worth it, but it's not easy. And so that vulnerability, I knew I needed to find somewhere where I could start to practice that and start to develop deeper relationships with other men. I just felt like I was missing this void. I didn't feel like I knew any men, truly knew them. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, man.
And I don't know like how you feel about this, but there's stats out there, Rick, that are pretty scary where they look at men, especially, you know, in their 30s and beyond. A lot of men, you know, have fewer than 2 friends that they would ever share a serious conversation about money, about relationships, about their feelings, their own emotions, like less than 2. Yeah. Over half the men surveyed, you know, in this massive survey by the Movember Project, you know, less than 2. And that's the average is less than 2. A lot of them have none. Like, that's crazy. It's crazy. And yet we just go on and we try to figure it out on our own. Right. And so, you know, I needed to find a place to start to practice the skill of vulnerability. And it's scary as hell. So any men that are listening to this, I'll tell you, it's scary. It absolutely is. But it's not a sign of weakness. It takes a whole lot of bravery, you know, to be able to actually speak your emotions in a way that others can actually now accept it. Does that make sense? Like, I don't want to sound cryptic. I'm trying not to sound cryptic because I know sometimes these kind of conversations can be a bit woo-woo, and I try to make it sound really real. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I don't know, like, how do you invite people to be more vulnerable? Because I think often vulnerability comes through one person going first.
It does. Right? That's exactly it. I'm usually the one to go first. You know, and it's not like I have I could see this if I was being strategic about this. I could have like 4 things for a new person that I could say, okay, I'm willing to share these 4 first. In order to say, maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. But usually it's just whatever I'm feeling at the time. I mean, it's probably, dude, I know it's different for me too, because I've been speaking on stages for 20 years. You know, I've been playing guitar. So, I mean, big into, you know, I was like a pro amateur, if you want to call it that, in music. So I was always expressing emotion that way. My dad was the same way. He was a musician too. But it's, cool. You know, and then I've had coaches that have said things like, you know, the story that you absolutely don't want to share is the one that you should share the most. So I embrace that with most. So I'm typically the one that will say, here, I'll go first. I'll tell you something about me.
See, that's great.
I'll open up, and it does take that one person too. And maybe that's the search. I don't know. Because again, I'm not the expert, but do you try to find somebody who's willing to be that first, to where you're comfortable around that? Because this is something to where, again, not sounding woo-woo, but to where men need to share with other men. And as you were talking too, I'm like, how many friends do I have that I can share things with? I started counting them in my head,
True, right?
And individuals that I would call, I'm probably at like 8 or 9, to ones that I would trust. So it's
like a lot more than most. You're about 500% up. Okay. So
that's good. And I'm grateful that I have those, but then I think it's like, how did I get to that 8 or 9?
Yes.
And it was more like, I just created the space. And at the same time, I also created the space for them to be able to share back, so that there was no, you were talking about judgment, so that there was no judgment, because anybody, humans, as you were talking, are just, nobody likes judgment, period.
Right.
So if you can create the space where it's judgment free, of course, God, we're all human too, and stuff starts to creep up in our minds as we hear things, even like some WTF moments, but when you get close enough to that person, it's more, you can call it after you're in that circle with them, then you can be like, dude, what the hell? Why'd you do that? But it's even that is from a supportive way. It's not from a judgment way. It's like, all right, I'll support you through this. Let's get you out of this hole you're in.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just providing a space to just listen.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's just the act. I often invite people to think back to some of the most challenging times that because we all have those moments, right? Those big obstacles that we run up against in our life. And, sometimes it can deflate us, and we turn around and go back where we came from, or we're fortunate enough that maybe we meet somebody that was able to shift our perspective enough so we can see another way around it. Or sometimes it's just pure resiliency and determination that we just I'm getting past this.
Yeah.
But either way, if you think back to those biggest challenges, when you've shared what your experience is, what you're experiencing in that moment, dealing with a challenge, and you share that with somebody else. I think back to those moments in my own life. I always felt better afterwards.
Oh, for sure.
And often I'd have the person saying, you know what? Me too. It's so crazy because, and those that are really apprehensive about vulnerability. And I love how Brene Brown talks about it, because she says, being vulnerable is not for shock and awe. We're not doing it to say, whoa, or to be polarizing, or that's not it. That's the wrong intention if you're trying to be vulnerable, right? To be vulnerable is to foster more connection and understanding. And what happens is, as soon as people start sharing, it's amazing how many people just hear you and really hear you, but then say, gosh, I had a similar experience. You're not alone. And that in itself is really what I took away whenever I started to embrace being more vulnerable, sharing people like, man, I feel really just intimidated by this thing I'm about to do. And here's why. And just to say it out loud. Right. And eventually, in the person that I often would get the response, it's like, whoo, yeah, you're right. That does sound intimidating. It sounds tough. I had a similar situation like this. And all of a sudden it's like,
dude, it's like everybody struggles with this stuff.
Yeah. That's it, right?
Everybody's got it going on.
Yeah. I know. And I think that was my biggest realization. As soon as I embraced it and trusted in myself enough that, you know what? I'm not going to die if I'm vulnerable.
Yeah.
I'm not. If you're someone that's into the fear setting aspect, I think back to Tim Ferriss in his TED Talk, he talks about that fear setting, right? Like that, what is the worst thing that could possibly happen?
Yeah.
And when you think on that, it really boils down to it's not a life-threatening situation, typically speaking. Now, of course, don't take me out of context here, but it's awesome. It's a human quality. And once you do it, you realize, and I'm not saying it's not, I don't think it ever gets to the point where it's easy. And I don't want to mislead people and say, you start being vulnerable, it becomes easy to be vulnerable. No. And you don't want to just be vulnerable for the sake of being vulnerable. You're doing it to connect with somebody, to let them know that, man, I hear you.
Dude, that's a huge point right there, because there are individuals, and it's more inward focus this way too, that I've seen, to where they'll just be vulnerable just for the sake of being vulnerable. Because it'll actually seem to like, it's being macho. That's what it is. Because like, watch how vulnerable I can be. Look at how much that I can share. And I've known men like this too, to where they'll just be like, here's what I've gone through. And it almost becomes like a trophy for them too, that they were able to be vulnerable. And it's only for themselves. It's not to foster connection.
Yes.
Which is the whole reason we're freaking on this planet to begin with, is connection with other humans. Right?
I was like, Zoom I would like to drop the mic. High five. Because you're spot on there, Rick. Like, that's exactly my point. And
freaking shut up if that's what you're gonna do, for real. I don't want to hear that. But if you want to have a genuine connection with somebody else, do it for the sake of connection. Because you're thinking, now I'm getting psyched up and like even a little bit angry, because that's the part where I just want to walk away. Because that's when I'm not in it for that. I don't want to have relationships with another human, men, women, whatever, just because they want to dump their stuff just because they want to. If you're doing it because you want me to support you, because it's a fair exchange of connection, then I'm all in. Not just to bring the stuff up, just to be like, hey, look at me. I'm able to share. Have you ever been in men's groups like that? I have. I sure as hell have. Yes.
I'll tell you, like, I've been to a few because I was searching for something.
Yeah.
Right? And I found it really hard to find a community that I really felt like I belonged to. And because it's easy to join communities. Like, it really is. I mean, social media has made it really easy. I mean, I think about Facebook. It's like a click of a button. Oh, I'm in a community. It's like, but to find somewhere where you really feel like you belong, that takes more effort, more time, more attention, but I found in a lot of the men's groups that I had an opportunity to get around. It clearly served people very well. And I'm not here to speak about it. I'm not trying to judge it, but it just didn't feel right. And so when Nick, my good friend Nick Wood at a Bali, I just sort of poised the idea. And I'm like, here's my idea. I just want to bring a bunch of cool dudes together every Monday night, dinner and conversation. No drugs, no alcohol, no drama. Like, just simply guys having an authentic conversation around some of the things that are real for them. That was it. And he was like, I'm in. And it's always that first person to say, okay, I'm in. And it just gave me that little boost of confidence. Like, all right, well, let's just do this thing. And it was neat to see how it grew, because just that one little invitation now of letting others know, this is our intention with this group. Are you open to that? Yeah, I'm curious about what that would be like. I'll come.
Yeah.
I'll check it out. And the next thing you know, you can't help but leave a conversation like that feeling not only empowered, more likely clearer in mind, but also just lightness. Like it's crazy, right? Like, sometimes we love to carry the burden of that weight, and we'll walk around like this with this on our shoulders, like, hey, check out me. I've got a lot on my shoulders, man. It's yeah,
that's the false vulnerability. That's the false vulnerability.
Well, it is, right? It is, and it's also like the term busy, right? Oh man, I'm so damn busy. Like, what does that mean? Like, we wear it like a badge of honor. I know I used to. It's like, you won't believe how busy I am. So my wife called me out on it. She's like, why do you always say you're so damn busy? It's like the first thing I hear, when people would meet me on the street, it's like, I'm so busy. Like, that was just like this, like, I felt like I needed to justify who I am because of how busy I am. Yeah. It's like, it was this characteristic that I used to describe who I was. Right. And she shifted me a lot in that, just helped me look at how I was using that as really a shield. Yeah. Sort of, because as soon as I say that to people are like, oh, well, I can't ask him for anything because he's too busy. I don't want to add anything to his plate. So I was actually pushing people away. And at the same time, thinking that I was making myself look more than I was. Yeah. It was just all ego driven. And so I shifted it, and I don't know what you think about this idea, but for now, I just tell people, my days are full. I've got a full life by choice.
I'm grateful. And, my day is full. Yes.
It's exactly it. Yep. It's exactly it. And so, I know what we're talking about today. There is a lot of semantics, right? Like, you talked about masculinity. Well, what does that mean? What does it mean to you? What do you understand it to be? And I think with a lot of these types of terms that's out there in the forefront now, because social media, it's all over the place. You can't help but look at this. I mean, I look at the Me Too movement. Amazing. But it was just that, people being vulnerable, sharing something that they've never shared before in a very open forum. But it all took was a couple people that started to share. Next thing you know, all these people are sharing.
Yeah.
And because they needed someone to just show them that it's okay, and I know we could talk all day about this, but I just love hearing how you've embraced this and you've recognized it's a masculine characteristic.
It is, man.
Because you make it so.
I appreciate the distinction that you've made in there too, because of, you said it's ego-driven, so maybe we could just dub it ego-driven vulnerability, rather than the false vulnerability, but ego-driven vulnerability versus selfless vulnerability. Right. One creates connection, the other one creates distance.
Correct.
Man,
very well put. That's very well put, man. I might have to quote you on that one.
Do it. For sure, man.
No, but I think that's a great way of looking at it. You're right.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the ways, some of the actions that we do, especially those ones that are more the subconscious, conditioned, as you said earlier, conditioned responses, right?
Yep.
And I truly feel that the way we sometimes like to turtle, retract or distance ourselves from tough conversations or tough situations, it is very much a conditioned response.
For sure.
But the cool thing is, if that's not the conditioned response that you want, there's always an opportunity to change it.
Yeah.
But you got to start doing the opposite and do it regularly.
No doubt, man.
and that's the hard part, right? Is like, oh gosh, well, I mean, how do you go out and practice vulnerability? Well, you just, Brene Brown's got great ideas on this. And I think I love everything she does. And I think she's influenced me a lot in a positive way.
That's awesome.
Teachings, especially on the professional side. I'm more in the leadership capacity, being a more vulnerable leader. And I always loved that. And but then I was like, but I want to bring this to my life as a dad, and those are different dynamics, right? It's a different conversation, different type of relationship we're talking about.
It is,
and that was where I really wanted more support. And it wasn't until I just opened myself up to have the conversation with other guys about it.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't going to happen unless I did that. So I guess what I'm trying to boil it down to, it ultimately just comes down to, it kind of feels like a leap of faith, a leap of trust. But man, when you find those connections, they're lifelong connections. They're lifelong.
I feel you. How did this help you? Because I know you're really, really big into dating your wife. That's something to look at. Yeah. How did this feed into that?
Well, language is a big deal in our house. And especially with my wife. She's pretty funny. We've got a few words that you can't say in our house. Oh, sorry, I just said it. Can't is like the 4-letter C word. We're not allowed to say.
I just did a whole episode on that with a friend of mine.
Yeah. Oh,
that's the 4-letter word that I absolutely hate.
Good. My wife, man, we hit it off. Like she's the same way. And so we're conditioned now in our household. Like we don't say that. We can choose to or choose not to, but it's an active decision.
The word can't abdicates your responsibility and obligation to make a choice.
Yes. Thank you. And so that when it comes to language, we recognize it's really important, and it's been very influential in our relationship as well, professionally. I really take hold that language is a big deal. It's how we connect, it's how we communicate, it's how we share ideas, inspire, motivate, educate. I mean, it's just language is critical in everything.
Yeah.
And when it came to our relationship, we're 21 plus years now. I mean,
nice.
We've had lots of ups, lots of downs. It's been a roller coaster at times, but we've remained committed to one another. And we share a vision, a family vision, but we also have our own individual aspirations. But we're co-committed, not codependent. And that was a term that I remember I think it's Gay Hendricks and his wife. I forget his wife's name, but they wrote a book, and I think it's called Conscious Loving. And it was just one of those relationship books, along with the 5 love languages. Those 2 books, they just made such a big difference in our lives from a relationship standpoint with one another, but also with others. So the 5 love languages, conscious loving, this idea of co-committed versus codependent. And once we had an understanding of that, it was like, okay, well, what kind of relationship do we want to have? Not just today, like 20, 30 years from now. Who do we want to be when we're in our 70s? What do we want to be doing? What do we want life to look like? And what we realized was that some of the best times we've ever had is when we were dating. It just, I mean, you can't help it, right? You think back to our relationships in those early days when you're just dating, just discovering. Every day is a discovery, right? With that person.
Yeah, for sure.
You're discovering this, that should never stop. It should never stop, you know? And so it really gave us a lot of intentionality when it came to our relationship. And so that's why, you know, I've used in some of my bios, right? Like,
oh, for sure. Yeah.
Of 21 years. Like I'm putting it out there. Yes, we continue to date each other. We create space for that. And yeah, the conversations have changed. Obviously it does, you know, but we're still in love. You know, we still are very committed to one another, but we're also committed to our own individual lives. And I think that's something I just want to really hammer home, that distinction is that.
Yes, please.
I think it's really important for these types of relationships. You need to have your own lives, man. Like even with our kids right from the get-go, you know, like we had lots of aspirations, things that we want to do. And we used to be the parents that would drag their kids everywhere. Like, I was just like, no, bring them. You know, I go to Toastmasters meetings. I'd be like, no, I'm bringing my kids.
Here, man.
Like, I competed in CrossFit for a lot of years, and all the competitions, I'd be the guy bringing his kids. You know, like they'd be off playing in the corner,
for
breaking
sure.
stuff. But
I've had questions. It's like, how are you so close to your kids? You're so busy doing all these other things. I'm like, proximity. When they were two, even with twins, I just grab one. I'm like, hey, we're going to go to Walgreens. I need to go buy some. Yes,
thank you.
Some vitamins or something. I'm just going to bring someone with me.
It's huge, right? The language. This also, what better way for your kids to have great behavior as a role model? They just get to follow and watch you.
Dude, some of the best conversations take place in the 5-minute car rides with your kids.
So true.
It's awesome.
So true. So anyways, that was my bit about language. You know, just like, and you know, this gets right down to our self-talk, right? Like, how do we talk to ourselves when no one's around? What are those thought patterns that we have? You know, and you know, when we talk about we want to be free of judgment, I mean, try to be free of judgment of yourself. That is the one I don't think we ever get away from, ever. You know, I like some of the positive messages out there, some of the positive thinking, you know, learn to love yourself unconditionally. I'm like, man, I've been trying to do that forever. I just when I think like I'm getting closer to it, I'm like, no. I don't know. It's maybe that's just me, but anyways,
I feel you. I had a bit of a breakthrough a couple months ago because I want to get back to dating your wife too, but it was more of. But it's so key because this is part of it, right? Because you have to have your own lives. You have to be committed to yourself before you can even be co-committed with somebody else. And one of those things that I figured out is that, you know, for the longest time, it's like I don't know if I love myself. I don't know if even I like myself. You know, and then I started realizing all these things to where even like retracting from things as we've been talking and not being vulnerable to keep, you know, like the subconscious thing to keep me safe. I realized it's like, well, if I'm doing that, I must really love myself because I'm trying to keep myself safe. You know? And it was like this moment of reflection to where it's like, if I'm doing all this stuff to try to keep me from things that subconsciously I think might cause pain or suffering, even though they don't, because it's scary, like a thing like vulnerability, or even like a thing like consistently dating your wife. I mean, imagine that, because I think that's a judgment zone, right? It can be.
You're right.
Especially if you feel like you need to share everything, you know, dude, if you're not committed to yourself, there's no way that you're going to be able to share everything with a partner. Impossible.
Right. It's true. It's so true. I mean, that first relationship, you know, it is that relationship with self. I mean, Maslow talked about it in his hierarchy of needs, right? You know, that was the pinnacle of that. It was that self-actualized self, right? Like that deep connection with purpose, and that, you know, why do we get up in the morning, right? Like that's a hard question to answer. Do we ever really answer it? Well, I don't know if we do, but it doesn't mean we stop looking for it. You know? And
well, it's kind of like the same, you know, we'll book on it maybe with the self-love thing, because I started laughing internally as we were talking again, you know, all these quotes that are out there. It's like, you need to learn to love yourself, you know? So, well, what if you already do? And you just don't show yourself that you do? Oh, yeah, it's true. Just like in a relationship with a partner, right? Yeah. You might love that person, but what if you don't show that person? Yeah. With your actions? Because then you're probably in that codependent scenario if you're not showing it. It's interesting you bring that up, because that was something that my wife and I also created space to support each other. So it had to be a team effort, especially, you know, this, you know, with kids,
it's people that we're responsible for, and I love that. I love that about being a dad, about being a parent, is I do get to support them and help shape them, and really help them be great people, humans.
It's pretty awesome.
And it is pretty cool, right? It's the neatest job on the planet, and what I found was really interesting is, with Christy and I and our dynamic, we recognized we needed space to have solo time, and regular, dependable solo time. And so we have, each of us have our own sort of self-care day, or I often call it a mental health day, where it's like, and those are my Fridays. My Fridays are for, she refers to it as Dai Day. And that's okay. It's my day for me. And, in the evening, of course, it's family time. But during the day, whatever I feel like I need to do for me, I do for me. So this is where I'll do, maybe I'll get a haircut, go for a massage, get a workout in, go for a hike. Doesn't matter. It's whatever I feel like doing. Like I block the time off of my calendar. I know that's my time to do whatever I feel like I want to do, but I'm not so prescriptive to plan out everything. Sort of just go with what I feel like doing, but lean into that. And it's really about me showing myself a lot of care and when we started Dimless, and I do the same for her. So there's days where I'm on full daddy duty as well as anything else that has to be taken care of in the household. And it gives her the space to then have her day to do what she needs to do to just look, show herself some of that love, or date herself, right? Like, how do you date yourself, right? Let alone date my wife, and so I love what you just said. But if we don't create the space for it, it's just not going to happen. Like anything, right? And how does it work with you and your partner? Like, do you create space for each other just to have that, just where you can solely just focus on you and what you want to do, Rick? Like, how's that work with you guys?
Yeah, I know she does every single morning. She takes about an hour every morning of every week, behind a closed door. Yeah. And then for me, mine, I'm not as intentional at it as you. I mean, I'm just being straight up on this, but
sure,
I will find time for this. And usually my time ends up being sort of days at a time, because it might be a seminar or something like that, not even around this, but I might take the evenings to do exactly that. I mean, there's been times I've been alone in a hotel room and that becomes my self-care time, right? Just meditating and writing down new notes. And now I've started, because I've neglected with all the stress in my life, I've realized this. My coach told me, it's like, yeah, you're not really dating yourself. And this was about a month ago. She called me out on it. She's like, here's what you need to do. You need to go get yourself a massage. And then 2 days later, you need to get yourself another massage. So, I mean, I'm probably not very good at this, as far as dating myself. And it's in my makeup to try to be there for everybody else first before me. But I recognize when that shifts out of balance too, that then I can't really be there for everybody else because I'm not there for me.
That's right. What a realization. So what have been the shifts that you've implemented? Like, what have you actually done to start dating yourself? Like, with the intention? Because I mean, it's always room for improvement, right? As you addressed, you said you might not be good at it, but you can get better at it.
Yeah, for sure, man.
So is there anything
I'll tell you, for the longest time, man.
Impact?
Yeah, for the longest time. No, you're good, man. For the longest time, prior to this, because mostly everybody in my house goes to bed early except me. Yeah. I'm always up late. It's just who I am. So for the past year or so, with how full my days have been, see how I use your language?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah,
with how full my days have been, I would try to use those times as catch up. So now it's whatever, if anything comes up, because even for me, like a week or a month ago, someone called me up and said, hey, I'm at a bar and I have my cousin here and he's looking at getting into real estate. Can you talk to him, tell him if it's good or bad? I'm like, cool. Because to me, that's actually like feeding me too, is being able to be there in that scenario. And it was unplanned. But most of my time happens at night like that too. And I'll pop on a movie, I'll do whatever to turn my mind off. That helps me a lot. Dude, I just another thing is, music, as I told you, was a big thing for me for a long, long time. And I really just started picking up my guitar. I mean, dude, I've played on stage and sang before thousands of people.
Gosh,
and
that's awesome.
For 5 years, I didn't even freaking touch my guitar, really, until like just this past month. Because I'd been neglecting that, and it's bringing me back to a place to where I can be centered all over again. Because we're high performing people, man. We can hold a lot together just because of our makeup. But we'll get to the point to where we'll start to feel our head compress in on itself if we don't date ourselves. I'll go for a drive a lot. I'll listen to music. Just in those things, I'll take a walk around the neighborhood. I live in Chicago, only when it's warm. I'll take a walk around the neighborhood. Otherwise, I'll go for a drive. But yeah, it's the little things. But I appreciate you because I'm starting to feel now, even just talking to you, man, that I need to be even more intentional with that time for myself and set that aside and block that time in my calendar.
It makes a difference, right? Well, I'm also that kind of person that I do like to schedule things. I like to, but I had a mentor I guess it's over 10 years ago, but because again, that same sort of time I was talking about, being busy versus now looking at my days as being more full, intentionality around how full my day may be is because it's always based on me and my commitments. And so I used to always talk about time management this, time management that. And then, he pulled me aside. And he's like, all this time management that you keep talking about and your struggles, with balancing life and career and yada, yada. It's like, Dai, just start managing your commitments. And I was like, wow, commitments. Oh yeah. Okay. I guess I see what you're doing here. That's funny, right? Coaches, mentors, like they're pretty good at that stuff. They shift our perspective just ever so
stuff
slightly.
Out of their butt. Yeah. It's in a very good way. Yeah.
In a very good way. And so I really started to shift how I thought about my schedule, my calendar. I was always like, I'm managing my commitments to time. And so now it's like, okay, do I feel like I'm overcommitting? And I know, because I know in myself now, I will be the guy that overcommits. And all of a sudden I'm left there starting to feel very negative about some of these commitments that I've made. Like even some of these great conversations with somebody and I'll be like, oh gosh, I got to do that now. And I know as soon as I get to that place, if I'm ever feeling any negative feelings to anything I put on my calendar, it's because of me. It's me not giving myself enough space for me.
Right on.
And my family and the things that really matter. So it sounds like you're in that place now where it's like, it just now, manage your commitments with self, right? Yep. And create that space because it's amazing. Once you start to create that regularity, at least this is what I experienced. I just like my bottom, I don't want to say my bottom line, my foundation, let's just say that, we all have this certain foundation that we build our life on. I often refer to that foundation being health, health first and foremost. But I've seen since I've started to do this, that foundation is actually raised up. What I mean is, so, sometimes when we feel really depleted, burnt out, as we often will refer to it, I'm creating more of a buffer. Does that make sense? Like, as soon as you start to create the regularity here, yes, like your opportunity to get to that place of burnout or frustration or disappointment with self, it doesn't happen as quickly. And even when it does happen, you bounce back so much more quickly. That is the biggest thing I've experienced since creating this regular, recurring commitment to myself. And I invite people. I'm like, just try it, but commit to it a full quarter, like a full 90-day run. Once a week, give yourself a dedicated block of time. Just do things that feel good for you within healthy reasons, like be reasonable on the health side.
Sure.
I had a guy tell me, well, I love going to the bar and getting wasted. And I'm like, well, that's not what I was referring to, but whatever, teach their own. But so
might be just a starting point. I don't know.
but that's what I'm trying to get at, is like, it ultimately comes down to us, right? Like, it sounds cliche, I know. And sometimes I hear myself say stuff. I'm like, dude, you're an idiot. Like this little self-critical voice, right? It's just like, man, who are you to talk about this? And that's why I feel the need for vulnerability to let people know, a lot of the stuff I talk about, it's just all stuff I have struggled a lot with. And I probably will continue to. It's just, I've learned different ways of managing the struggle with the juggle, if that makes sense. So, anyways, man, I know I start to ramble.
No, you're awesome, dude. I appreciate you being on, man. No, it's awesome. DaiManuel.com, Dai Manuel on Instagram. Dude, thank you for having part 2 and diving into this and vulnerability and relationships and dating your wife and just dating yourself.
Well, thank you, Rick. I mean, you are always so much fun to speak to, but it's also, I feel that, just based on what I know about you and what our conversations, both on air, off air, you're just the kind of guy that I always draw a lot of inspiration from.
Thank you.
And I just want to say thank you for showing up as you, and thank you for being authentically yourself, and as well as having the courage to be vulnerable and tell the rest of us that it's okay. So because you do it in a very public way, right? Like, I mean, putting out a podcast, putting out content.
It's a little bit public.
To some, dude, it is an exercise in vulnerability, right? In a big stage. And listen, man, you've inspired me. I know I'm pretty jazzed up, and I'll go on the record right now. I'm going to have my own podcast, but in the next few months, and I'm going to have you as a guest. So there it is. It's on the record.
I'm so in.
Well, I just want to say thank you.
Awesome, brother.
I really appreciate you, man, and your team, and Ryan's been awesome, and gosh, everything. It's just been an amazing experience. So
thank you. Thank you.
What's shaking? Thank you for joining me on the All In Podcast. Click the subscribe button and smash that bell for notifications. Text me, 312-535-8520. Follow me on social media at Mr. Rick Jordan. See you next episode. I am Rick Jordan, and I approve this message.